Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this very exciting evening, the book lounge of Donna, Teaching the Dinosaur to Dance. It's such an intriguing title, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about it. My name is Julie Arts. I know many of you, but I also see a couple of new names. So I'll be in dialogue with Donna about her book. And I had the opportunity and privilege to read the book already. And so through our conversation, we hope that it will give you the same flavor I had while reading it about the book, and maybe give you the will to even read more. But we'll open up at the end for questions. So you could already read the bio of Donna in the email and in the announcement. I just want to bring it a little bit more light to Donna's enormous, diverse life, where she grew up on a farm and then studied law, went into energy, founded a nonprofit in Yemen, worked in 35 countries, and all of that diversity of experience, life experiences and work experiences led to this book, Teaching the Dinosaur to Dance, Moving Beyond Business as Usual. And some people at first glance think, oh, maybe it's about business, maybe it's not about me or about my world, but it's about everybody. And it's about enterprise, but it's about organizations. And this book for me is for everybody who's influencing or influenced by organizations. We all can do something to create this better world and to contribute in our own way, each of us one step at a time. It's not only the CEOs and the politicians. And I can already say that why it resonated so much with me was that in the very first chapter, I read words like consciousness and wholeness and stewardship, storytelling, soil regeneration, and it just really took me, I was so interested, and it was as if I was listening to Donna tell me a story instead of reading a book about something. So I truly enjoyed that. For today, so we'll first start with a little bit of conversation between me and Donna to allow you to have a sense of what this book is about in its width and depth. Then Donna will read her favorite part of it, and then we'll open up for questions so you have a possibility to ask some questions. Feel free to use the chat. Feel free to completely ignore the chat. It really depends on how you want to participate. It's lovely to express yourself, and for some people, it's very distracting. So just really take care of your own, how you want to be present here. But if you like using the chat, then you can introduce yourself. We will keep an eye on the chat, not being able to promise we'll catch all the questions that are there. But we will keep an eye on it. And so our idea was to keep this call around 75 minutes. We're not rigid about it, so it could be shorter, or maybe it becomes a bit longer, but then that is what we had in mind for this call. So Donna, maybe we can spotlight you, Donna. We had just in the instance I said that, we had lost Donna for a second.
But she should be back.
But she is back. Okay. So Donna, I will invite you to come in. And so we saw that you dropped for this little moment. So I finished the introduction and shared a little bit what this call will be like. And right now, I would like to start with asking, about teaching the dinosaur, moving beyond business as usual.
Well, thank you, Julie. Can you hear me okay?
Now we hear you very well.
Okay.
And we see you very well.
Good. Thank you to Julie and to Eleanor for making this happen. This is a very gracious invitation to this community, and I'm grateful for every one of you that's taken the time to join here. My internet just crashed, which is why I slipped it out and back in again. So I'm on my cell phone with one hand, which is kind of apropos for the world that we're living in right now. So we are all trying to do things differently because we're required to do things differently. So I'm holding this phone in one hand, and I'll be speaking to you because I'm not Italian, but I do like talking with my hands with the other.
Wow.
So I'm grateful to be able to talk about this book and why I wrote it and why I wrote it now. So thank you, Julie. I appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome. It was a joy to read it, to have that opportunity. And so, Donna, the first question that I would like to ask is, where was your care for enterprise, for sustainability, for the future, for the planet? Where was it seated?
I think as you read the book, it becomes very, very obvious. And it was actually something that became clearer to me through writing the book. Writing is a discerning process for me. I think it is for a lot of people. It's why a lot of people journal, and I think that's really important. I grew up on a family farm. It's now been in our family for 5 generations. It's in Southern Ontario. It's a very lovely farm, means a great deal to me. I left that farm when I was going into university and was happy to leave, was very excited about the possibility of looking out into the world. And I moved 2,000 miles away and have traveled the world. And yet that farm and that soil and that place are actually what taught me to understand.
Oh, Donna.
I prefer to see people face to face. And in that, it inside me what it was like to steward a family farm. I was able to understand why people cared about their places, their communities, their companies, their nonprofits, their businesses, and what was inside them. It's not exactly the same, but that sense of stewardship for me comes from the place that I grew up.
Thank you, Donna. And just that you froze for a little bit, but when we could hear you again, everything made total sense. So it was still very good too, and I understand your answer. Of course, let's start with the title because it's such an intriguing one, right? Teaching the dinosaurs to dance. Like the words that caught my attention were dancing and dinosaur. Like how did you come to that title and what does it say about the book?
Well, I think a title is really important. And I originally had entitled this book, Rebuilding Enterprise. And the concept of enterprise was not just for-profit business, but it was a government enterprise, it was nonprofit enterprise. But that's a pretty boring title. And I've written before, I wrote a book called Corporate Integrity, and that, was very clear what the message was about. This story and this book is not just a business book. It's a book about how do any of us engage with the dinosaur. And the dinosaur can be ourselves, that sense of rigid thinking that's inside us that stops us from being able to move forward on different ideas, or it's the people we work with and the dinosaurs out there in government or the dinosaurs in business who just won't change. In Alberta, we have a lot of dinosaurs, the real ones, and there are lots of fossils. But we also have a lot of dinosaur thinking. And some people think that, the office towers where energy companies are located are the place where dinosaurs live. And we joke about it. The dinosaur idea is also very playful. So this is Figment, a dinosaur with a tutu, a very, lovely colored tutu. And I've got a grouchy dinosaur named Rex. It's a puppet, and I use him for TikTok. And he's very grumpy, and he's kind of like that person inside you who's always nagging, always negative. So the dinosaur is playful. It's part of, you know, if you look around and you start seeing dinosaurs everywhere. My granddaughter, who's 2, loves dinosaurs. I constantly raid her toy box. So it's part of our way of thinking about things. And teaching the dinosaur to dance was about giving space, giving permission, inviting that people with that stuck thinking and ourselves to be more open to movement, to different ideas, to not being stuck and rigid, but to dancing. And the idea of dancing is that we dance with one another, we dance in groups, we dance solo, and we have to think about it. We have to be intentional about it, but there's also something freeing in that, and it's movement. And back to Bohemian thinking, it's really powerful. So teaching is also a big word in this, but teaching the dinosaur to dance, I think, speaks to hope and speaks to the need to keep trying, even though it's very difficult at times. So there's a lot packed into that title.
It is. And I think that it's also so relevant, this book, as you speak a lot about the time we are in, this moment on the planet, post-COVID, but also climate change. There's a lot of things that you mentioned, which this book not only shares stories about, but also gives hands-on tools.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I think many people will be so happy to hear a book that is so specifically looking at the storm we're in today and helping us prepare for afterwards. Do you want to share more about that moment we're in?
Absolutely. Is my voice coming across okay? I'm very sad that this is so constrained. Is it okay?
It's okay. We see you well. The phone is moving a little bit, so I was wondering whether it would help you if you could put it down against a book or something, just that you are more relaxed.
Oh, I'm pretty relaxed. Is that better?
Voila.
Okay. All right. The subtitle to the book is Moving Beyond Business as Usual, which is actually, you know, pretty important right now, that we understand that the status quo, the way things were, especially pre-COVID and now pre a war in Ukraine, we can't go back. Things have changed. We have to accept that things have changed, and we have to be positioned to take people to a place that's hopefully better, but we can't go back. And I think that's hard for a lot of people. It's important, in my mind, to hold that space with compassion, because there are a lot of people who are stuck. There are a lot of people who don't like change. There are a lot of people who are afraid of change. But if we don't change and we just turtle and we just hide under this umbrella of, you know, oh my goodness, there's asteroids out there, but yeah, I don't want them to hit me, so I'm going to hide under this umbrella and try to stay safe. That's not going to work anymore. So how can we compassionately lead people to a place that's a future that's different, but that is better? And so that's a big part of this theme. And back to the dinosaurs again, the idea that a lot of people feel like they're being they're in the middle of an asteroid zone, where every time they look up, you know, I don't know how many of you saw that movie, Don't Look Up, but every time they look up, they see some other asteroid coming their way, whether it's, you know, supply chains don't work anymore, or they don't work the way they used to, and globalization is coming undone. We've got polarization everywhere. Every discussion in North America, and I think it's well beyond North America, is polarized. We've got now crazy inflation that's very, very difficult for politicians. It's very, very difficult for people to lead through. We've got fairness expectations, we've got cancel culture, we've got climate change, we've got net zero expectations, we've got new expectations for sustainability, we've got new competition, we've got people talking about a Cold War 2.0. It goes on and on and on. So one of the big things in this book is to acknowledge all those things and talk through them and allow you ways to talk through those issues. I don't have the answers, but I do think being able to intelligently, honestly, openly, transparently talk through the challenges that are most pressing for your organization or your enterprise, whatever that might be, and then to come to pathways that will take you to clear strategies that you can implement to respond. So I acknowledge the asteroids, they're real. And the problem is for people is if they spend all of their time looking up at the asteroids and stop focusing on their work, whatever that work is, we risk losing a lot. We risk nothing happening. We lose productivity, we lose direction, and we just lose our energy. So that's a big part of the book is finding those pathways.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, as far as I could tell, COVID amplified a lot of things that were, or the pandemic, let me say, call it, a lot of things that were dysfunctional in organization, but could be structured away or managed to silence. And then because of the pandemic, that was no longer possible in how we had to collaborate. And so if the capacity to collaboration wasn't there, that was amplified. If trust wasn't there, that was amplified. So I love how in your book you mention all of those things, but also just have ideas and tools of people how to start the conversation about this and how to make shifts towards it. So when we were talking, we share this experience of working with organizations that are trying to make a change, whatever that change is. So I think you both in your own organizational past, but also as working as a consultant with organizations, I think you taught a lot of dinosaurs to dance. Those stories are, it makes it alive. It makes it very, like you start to understand true stories often. So what's your favorite story that you could share here that would start to give it, a bit of a sense of application, what it looks like teaching the dinosaur?
I think you've hit on a really big point. This is a lot about storytelling. And I think people with corporate speak in particular, people have become reluctant to tell their stories, to tell their own version of an organizational story in particular. And I try not to do that in the book because I think it's really important that we tell stories of our own enterprise through our own eyes. And that's the way that makes it more rich. It's not corporate speak or double speak. To quote Orwell, it's very personal. And I think that is, people become aware of that as they read that into a book. One of my favorite stories, because it's accessible and it's easy to imagine, it has to do with a zoo that's located in the city where I live in Calgary. It's called the Calgary Zoo. And it was the #1 tourist destination for years in the city. It's a beautiful zoo. It's well done. We love going there. I loved going there when my kids were young. I like taking my granddaughter there. It's just something we resonate around. And I'm sure you have places in your own community that are like that. And a friend of mine, who is the chief financial officer at the zoo, was very passionate about moving along the purpose of that zoo from being the #1 tourist destination in Calgary to being a place for wildlife conservation, a beacon for wildlife conservation. So he worked very closely with the executive team and then with the whole organization and all of the funders and all of the partners to reorient that zoo from being a tourist destination to being a place for wildlife conservation. And it was difficult because there were a lot of people who are really stuck in the idea of this is a zoo. This is where we go with our families. This is something to be proud of. We are financially independent. This is glorious. What could be better? So as a financial guy, he would say things like, in our budget, we need to review the budget and make sure that we're giving priority to wildlife conservation. And that may mean investing in something that's totally invisible to the public. And so it was hard. But today, if you went to the Calgary Zoo, you would see signs everywhere that say, thank you for helping to invest in wildlife conservation. Even the guy who's flipping the burgers and giving you your lunch is going to say, thank you for contributing to wildlife conservation. And the partners that they have now are very different than the partners they had 8 years ago, 10 years ago, because they've needed to collaborate in that conservation space. So I share that story because it's accessible to all of us. We all think we're investing in something really great. I think investing in sustainability is really great, but it begs the question, can there be more? Can the pursuit be stewardship and not just sustainability? Because sustaining is about the status quo. Stewardship is about regeneration and building something even better. It's not something we do willy-nilly, and I'm not flippant about it at all. It's a huge investment of effort and intention and every other resource we've got. But I think there are times when we do have the opportunity to do something differently. And the Calgary Zoo is one of those stories.
It is a huge shift in vision and values, to say capturing animals to showcase them towards preservation. And then if everybody believes that that's true, who's working there and who's coming there, you have a totally different story. So I guess storytelling became that. Storytelling and stewardship, I think, are the words I read the most in your book. Is that true? Kind of right.
Yes, I think that's true, Julie. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that was I loved how that was built up from your childhood on the farm, going to law and seeing the world through a certain lens, then going into energy and energy sustainability, politics, working with women in Yemen. So all of that, you could feel like you really took every life experience and made that in who you are and where you are at. Because you wrote that other book, Corporate Integrity. That was, if I'm right, in 2005?
Yes, that's right.
Which is a world away. That's not, those are in that year, the world shifted many times. So what was the biggest difference with that book? Because I think somehow it gives a glance on how you changed and how the world changed.
A Corporate Integrity was written after the Enron scandals, and there was a time when the world wanted corporations, and I'm talking just now about for-profit companies, not enterprise more widely, they wanted them to comply with the rules that were set by governments because they had done bad things and they were not to be trusted. And my thesis then in that business book was, if we want companies to do more than just comply with law, because that's a pretty low bar, why don't we have to recognize when they do go beyond compliance? And I encourage companies that I work for and that I advise to consider when it's possible for them to make a positive social contribution, environmental governance, and now, even stewardship. And I think a lot of companies are interested in that space. And now we've got, lots of talk about it. It's more comfortable to talk about it, but then it wasn't. That book in 2005 was it was a how-to book. It was a book about, if you want to do this and move beyond compliance with rules and laws, here's how you do it. And it was a business guidebook. This book today, I didn't plan on writing it. During COVID. I find writing comes to me as something that's sort of it tells me what I need to do. It directs me. And I was writing in the middle of the night. I was getting up and writing and writing and writing and writing. No idea of a book in mind. I write all the time, so it wasn't unusual, but I could start to see that something was cohering. And it was about telling stories and getting to the why of why we do these things. Why do we care? Why do I care about this family farm that I am still living thousands of miles away from? But it's deeply meaningful to me. And why do we care about certain things? And why do companies and why do nonprofits care about some of these really big issues that are coming our way? And they have to find a pathway. And the world expects that they're going to move beyond compliance. They expect that they're being part of the solution to these problems because we have no other choice. We have to all pull in a direction, or we're never going to get through the crises that we're in right now. I mean, look at us now. Ukraine has been attacked. Energy, food security, let alone physical security, is at risk. And now we've got green energy and hydrocarbon energy talking to one another about how to backfill, how to create enough synergy so that we can get through to something that's more stable. For Europe, we talk about this all the time in Canada, and not just from the perspective of, oh, let's make money, because I think everybody realizes how short-term that is and how vulnerable we all are. How do we create the conditions? What's my role in that as a company, as a government agency, as a nonprofit, as a community, as a citizen? I think we all get it, that no one entity is going to fix these things. In particular government. And I've been a politician since I wrote that book in 2005. I was an elected politician and a minister in a government here in Alberta. So I come at it, I think, with a deeper sense of imperative than ever before, and a hope, an optimism that what I feel inside me that compels me to write and to say, this isn't perfect, this isn't easy, and we're going to make lots of mistakes, and God knows I've made lots of mistakes, but notwithstanding, we still must try. And if all of us try, that is the best we can do. And I have confidence in other people's trying because I've heard their stories. So that's a huge difference in approach and tone in a book, but it's about that sense of hope. It's about the tone, and it's about the imperative.
Yeah, I mean, the tone is very different in the sense that I was literally reading it and listening to someone telling me their story. And so I am not a business person. I am not a politician. I worked a lot in organizations, but still, I was listening to it as a citizen that cares and not always knows what I can do or struggle to see clearly, because they're all those asteroids out there. So for me, it felt like it's for everybody who cares. It can be helpful, and it gives this new vocabulary on how we can, you called it leadership skills, I think, in the book, but what is needed for us, all of us, each of us, what we could develop if we felt called to find that thing that we want to contribute to the future. So that tone, I recognize that. And also the feminine, I think it was more of a feminine voice than, can I say that?
You can certainly say that. It's funny, when I think when I wrote Corporate Integrity, I was writing it as not an academic, because I'm not an academic. I'm what we would probably call an applied researcher. These tools that I pitched in these books are things that have been tested and tested and tested and tested. So they're definitely not just kind of figments of my imagination. But I'm not coming at it as an academic, but I felt like there was a box, there was a crispness to, corporate integrity has boundaries. I feel like, and at the time I knew it didn't, but I dared not say that because, you know, if I wanted business people to heed my advice and this experience, I needed to talk in their language. I think now I'm almost 62. I care even more than I cared before, if that's even possible. But I don't think change happens until you speak to a person. So I've seen lots of business leaders, and I'm not talking about formal leaders, I'm talking about informal as well as formal people who will lead change, who will initiate, who will take risks, even when somebody doesn't tell them to. And I think there's something inside us that feels that, hears that voice, and it's our own voice or some other voice, and that's very spiritual and that's important. And heeds it and has the confidence to speak up and not to mute themselves. Because right now it's not very comfortable to speak up. But I think the only way to speak up, whether you're the, you know, the CEO of Disney right now and you're sitting in Florida trying to figure out what to do with Republicans who are saying, you know, get back in your lane. We don't want you here. Like, that takes a lot to speak up. Or if you're on a board of directors, or if you're in a community and you're making a decision and you're not comfortable about how the decisions are being made. Maybe the decisions do not serve the community that you intend to serve. How do you speak up? How do you do that from a place of compassion instead of anger? How do you be effective? I think that's what it's all about. And I don't think it matters what the title is of the work that you're doing. I think it's the same feeling inside and the same motivator. And you need the same leadership skills to be able to hold a polarized conversation, like to hold the space in a polarized conversation and not get drawn into the battle, you know, the red team or the blue team, but to say, look, I hear all of you and I want to hear all of you, but I haven't picked a team. And frankly, I think there are parts of what both of you are saying that have validity and parts that aren't particularly useful right now. How do you hold that space? Whether you're in a political party and you have to do that, or you're in a, you know, fight inside a corporation or between a corporation and a community, or whatever the space you're in, those are skills, those are leadership skills that are personal. And you have to figure out which ones are important to you and how do you learn those skills and practice them so that you can hold that space and do the work that you choose to do in this life of yours.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. I think that, you know, holding space for dialogue to happen in polarized spaces, I think it's the mastery the world could need more of. And just listening to you, I have at least 6 questions coming up to me, but I'm going to control myself. And I'm going to invite you to maybe read something from your book, your favorite piece, and all of us. Feel free to just look out of the window while you're listening to Donna reading her little piece. It's like 5, 6, 7 minutes, so it's not that long. But you don't need to look at the screen. If you can look out of the window, that's totally okay. And then after that, we'll just have a little bit of reflection, and then we'll open up to all of you to hear what resonates, what questions come up, etc. But Donna, over to you so that we hear literally your voice from your book.
Thank you, Julie. Just so you see with the book, it's playful. I'm going to go to chapter 6, which is called Make Stewardship Part of Your Enterprise Story. Bookton Lane is a graveled, potholed back road that cuts through the fields of my youth, a shortcut between the farmhouse where I grew up and the cemetery where my parents and grandparents lay in rest. On most visits to the farm, I walk this narrow road and let the memories unspool. One of my most vivid memories is as a 9 or 10-year-old girl riding in the backseat of our family's white Ford Galaxie on a Sunday morning in early May, heading home after church service. It was a sunny, warm spring day. Our Sunday best clothes smells freshly starched. The first shoots of green were piercing through the rich loam in their straight rows, and Dad had slowed the car down to a crawl to inspect his cornfields. As we neared the intersection of Bookton Lane and Wyndham Road 5, I recall feeling an overwhelming flash of insight. It was as if the lush fields and the dusty lane and the blue sky and our shiny white Ford full of family and the songs of the red-winged blackbirds in the nearby ditches became one. The moment may have lasted only 5 or 6 seconds, but it is seared in my memory. The feeling was akin to being fully immersed in water, all boundaries dissolved, a feeling of immense harmony and oneness and fecundity. I was awestruck. Fragments of that same feeling of awe caused me to pause decades later when hiking in the Rocky Mountains or traversing magnificent wadis in the deserts of Yemen. While I respect industrial achievement and have even come to admire the power and efficiency of the 500 kV electricity transmission line constructed through the very field of my epiphany, the natural world is where I find meaning and discover hidden connections that bind us all together. My experience with the land where I grew up is a big part of my personal and professional story, and my sense of what stewardship means originates from that wellspring. Not every enterprise is one that I personally choose to steward, because doing so is a significant commitment not assumed lightly. Most enterprise is about creating employment, paying taxes, and contributing to society in the here and now. The family farm is an enterprise where I feel a different accountability, an obligation to tend the resources for the long term, even a duty to leave the place better than I found it. Owning farmland is one thing. Having a sense of responsibility to future generations, the local community, and the land itself is something more. This land isn't just commodified nature. Stewardship means that you don't just draw down on the fecundity of those fields and then move on to greener pastures. Fresh water is a resource people often relate to with a sense of stewardship. For example, water used for households and industry must be used responsibly and cleaned up so it can be safely returned to its source. And First Nations friends sometimes speak of a feeling of a sense of stewardship in relation to the entire earth, a mighty obligation exemplified by the 7th generation principle of the Haudenosaunee people. The term stewardship is insufficient to explain what is essentially really a reciprocal relationship. Humans are not just caretakers of Earth. In fact, Earth can take care of itself without humans or dinosaurs. The planet provides care for its inhabitants too. It's the knowledge of this circular relationship that is at the root of values and actions that strive for stewardship, regeneration, and renewal. For many forward-thinking enterprise leaders, sustainability is the holy grail. Sustaining requires that natural resources not be eroded or diminished, which is a significant challenge when Earth's human population is in a growth mode. But ultimately, sustainability is still connected to the status quo. At the highest rungs of a measure of integrity, the aim is of a higher order. Stewardship and regeneration contemplate more than a sustaining of the way things are. These higher order aims are grounded in a sense of reciprocity between the natural world and humanity, between the enterprise and its stakeholders, a sense of going forward together in a good way toward a better future. Stewardship is a big umbrella, and your specific focus will depend on the inputs your enterprise relies on, the outputs it produces, and the priorities of the communities in which you operate. Occasionally, I feel a sense of stewardship to man-made constructs, including long-standing institutions such as the Banff Center, a responsibility to leave the place in better condition for future generation. Stewardship values, together with the regeneration aims that sit at the pinnacle of a measure of integrity, are only rarely achievable for enterprise. It is a glorious aspiration. And it is through storytelling that your enterprise's pursuit of stewardship aims are best articulated. The telling of a heartfelt story will help others envision your aspiration and inspire them to pull in the same direction, and can build trust within the organization and in the broader community. Increasingly, enterprise of all kinds will need to incorporate the aim, or at least the idea, of stewardship into their storytelling in order to respond to the growing pressure from stakeholders and the general public to be more transparent, responsible, fair, and accountable for their actions. Focusing on short-term results and efficiency, the status quo, is quickly becoming an unsustainable and untrusted model for enterprise. It's time to build the long view into your organization's value system, goal setting, and decision-making, and the stories you tell the world about all of that. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you very much. I remember you saying that you plan to do one day an audiobook with your voice. I think that's a great idea. So I would just invite all of us to just take a couple of breaths and to just feel like with everything you've heard so far, like what resonates with you or what doesn't. Where do you feel that resonance with your own life and context? And what curiosity is there? Like, are there any questions in here? And then maybe I'll first come to you, Beth, because I saw that you posted a question in the chat. Once we've done our breaths, I'll ask you to read out your question.
Can we ask questions without having to go to the chat room? It's a real distraction for me. Yes, I don't want to do it.
It's you can. I mean, there's not that many of us. You can wave to just then I'll know, or you can do the digital raise hand if you click on reactions. But yes, no, absolutely, you don't need to use the chat at all. But I've seen Beth's questions, that's why. So Beth,
yes,
you want to comment?
Yes, Donna, I just really loved what you said. That was just heartwarming. And I know you and I share a background in having spent lots of time in large organizations. And so I can really give a lot of appreciation for that. I love the storytelling part because I think it communicates in a whole different way. And I wondered, as I was listening to your story about the zoo, it seemed to me that the person who is in charge, the CEO or whatever he's called, he or she, had another part to their wisdom. And I wondered about that. So if a person would go to the zoo and the hamburger flipper says to me, thank you for your contribution to the stewardship we're doing here, something has happened so that person is involved enough that they're saying something like that. So the CEO seems to have done something about participation and helping people to find the aliveness of that vision that he or she carries. I'm curious, I would call it participation, but I wonder how that fits in. How would participation fit in with your ideas about stewardship?
Oh, it's a wonderful question, Beth. Thank you. And I'm apologizing again because I feel like this is very. I'm apologizing because I'm having to do this on a cell phone. So I feel badly about that. Often ideas about change come from the CEO and the board of directors, and they edict that there's going to be this new way of doing enterprise, and and we're going to be the leaders in wildlife conservation and rah, 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 rah. And here's this, here's the corporate speak on it and rah, 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 rah. And when people don't own it, who are part of that enterprise, and I think, that who we engage with should be, I believe in stakeholder capitalism, which we should talk a little bit about here. That's just, it's dry, it's dead, it's not alive, and it's not a shared value. When the guy who's flipping the hamburgers actually says and looks in your eyes and says, you know what, today, by buying this hamburger, you help us to do wildlife conservation, and it's real, it changes my view of the zoo. It is about participation. It is about some sense of shared values. It doesn't mean that you have the chaos of everybody in an enterprise getting to decide their own values and, willy-nilly, the next person you talk to says, well, thank you for supporting, XYZ. That's not what I'm talking about. But they believe those values. There's been enough dialogue within the organization and with other stakeholders outside the core team that people have come to terms with it in their own sense. I come to work to get a paycheck, but I'm also doing this other thing. Like, not just great place for Donna to bring her granddaughter, but it's a great place for people who care about wildlife conservation to participate. So it's a sense of ownership. It's a sense of, I hate to use the word entitled because it's so loaded right now, but there's a sense of being entitled to speak up and say something, and it's part of your story too. And I think we've for so long, we've constrained those voices and told them what to think, told them what to say and how to say it. And everybody's so nervous, especially with, critical race theory and diversity and this asteroid and that asteroid, that people are afraid to say things because they don't want to offend. And I think we're finally giving some oxygen to values. And I think that's what it's about, Beth. And when you see it, it's magic. It takes on its own life and something you couldn't even have envisioned. So, but it's hard. It's very hard. It takes time. And it takes a letting go, which is not easy for command and control people to do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Hugh, you want to bring in your voice?
Well, thank you. Let me take that opportunity. Donna, thank you. Help me tease out this anomaly that I think you created by suggesting that sustainability had some association with maintaining the status quo. And yet at the heart of sustainability, there's a maintenance of ecological balance. And it's a maintenance process in which, as you say, the earth can take care of itself. It's when the great and the good and the powerful can't resist taking over the problem and exercising control over what needs to happen, when actually that's the problem. We have a relationship which assumes dominance over, ever since Genesis, whatever chapter it was that deluded our that portion of our civilization that is Judeo-Christian, has been deluded ever since into thinking, as the forefathers in the United States were deluded into thinking, they are now in charge of managing the estate. And that comes very close to what you were saying about stewardship. I worry a lot about the implication of some of those suggestions of stewardship, that luckily for the earth, we're growing a new generation of stewards. The earth doesn't need us to be stewards. So I wonder if you could speak to these anomalies, because they bother me.
Oh, wow. You've opened up a can of worms, which is fantastic. Thank you. A couple comments, and we could talk about this all day, and I'm happy to anytime. I come from a Judeo-Christian background, but I have worked a lot with other faiths. I've done a lot of cross faith dialogue. So I understand the point about dominion over. It's not part of my value set. I do not think that humans alone can fix the planet. That's a personal view. It's my view. So my sense of stewardship doesn't come from there. But I do think we're a partner in this, and I think it is a collaborative effort. So I feel like it's a dance. It's part of that dance going forward together to a better future. I don't know exactly what the dance is going to look like, the stewardship dance, but I think we get glimmers of it from time to time, as I explained in that epiphany scenario. I think people do have access to epiphanies. I know people do because I have, and I think other people do other ways. So I don't see it as an either or. I live my life I don't see it as an either or person. So it's again back to personal worldview. The idea of sustainability as a sustaining of the status quo is, I understand your point exactly about ecology means keeping things in balance so that they will be capable of being stewarding, self-stewarding. I understand that. But when you talk to a lot of people who talk about sustainability, they're talking about sustaining the status quo. We're going to, the temperature level increase in the world cannot, it must be sustained at this level. I think those are, I worry about that. I think that sustaining the status quo is not sufficient in some cases. And when I look to this family farm, for me, that is a reference point, a values reference point. I don't think it's enough to sustain the family farm. I think we have to, I, as a human, have to contribute as a partner with nature in stewarding that to a better place. So I think there is a sense in some communities, and maybe my personal experience of being so close to the extractive sectors for so long has clouded my vision. But there are lots of people I know who think sustaining is the status quo. You and I have talked about this before, but I just, for everybody else's sake too, I spent some time with Carl Henrik, who's the lovely leader of the Natural Step in Sweden. And I left the climate change meetings in Paris in 2015. I was there with a purpose, and in the nonprofit space. And I went over to Sweden. I was teaching, but I actually met with him for a day to talk through the idea of sustaining and the hydrocarbon sector, and if there ever could be something that would be sustainable in that sector. The answer in his world is no. And I talk about that in the book because that's a very challenging, daunting question for people who are still working in that space. And I think we're getting to some clarity on it. I don't have the answers to all of the questions about how do you bring together the polarity of, climate change and hydrocarbon extraction. But I have worked in that space for a very long time. And I think there's a lot of conversation that is more nuanced, not evasive. I'm not talking about evasive. I'm talking about the subtleties. And I think right now, what's going on in the world with people facing energy insecurity, I think those questions are getting pushed. There's more pressure to get clarity. And I think it's an awful thing, but I also think the pressure to get clarity is also maybe going to help us to get some clarity. But I haven't seen an epiphany yet for a long time there. So I think we have a way to go. Those are not complete answers to your questions, Hugh. Those are profound questions. And I grappled a great deal with the idea of moving beyond sustainability to something called stewardship. But it is not because I think that humans have the singular capacity to do this. It's something that we contribute to. But I think it is a different sense than sustainability alone. And I also think the word I dedicate the whole first chapter to the concept of sustainability, because even over my career, like 40 years, what is sustainable has undergone the most incredible exploration, clarification, change. I mean, one word. So it's so fraught. And I'm trying to unpack that. And it's an audacious goal. I think I might get through it, but that's the background to that.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you, Donna. So I just wanted to repeat, like, if you would like to bring in a question and you are on camera, you can wave if you want. If you're off camera, you can either write it in the chat or click on reactions and do the digital raise hand like Ellen just did, so that we are sure that we can bring you in. So Ellen, over to you.
Hi, Donna. Thank you for your presentation, your talk. I'm hugely struck by this idea of stories and actually having a story, because it seems to potentially be an answer to something I've been struggling with for ages. And that is the tendency, well, the fact that often organizations, companies are driven by incentives. And those incentives are so often quantitative. And I can think of one particular organization that just drives me crazy, where so much is about revenue. It's a members club, but a very famous one. And so much seems to be at the end of every year, they can say, well, this is the revenue we've generated. But what they actually then do with that revenue is there's a big issue over that. And all the things I think the organization should be doing, but it doesn't do. So I think this idea of story, because it has this qualitative element, I just think it's fantastic if there could be this developing story and these updates. So my question, though, is how does one actually stop the story turning into propaganda, spin, nation? Now, this is all, I was wondering that. And the only thought that I've had so far is by speaking to everybody, and that includes the hamburger flipper in the organization. In fact, people both inside and outside speak to everybody. But I was just wondering if you could offer thoughts on how do you create and get buy-in to a true story, as opposed to, you can imagine, politicians turning it into spin, propaganda, and misinformation. But thank you.
I've asked this question. It's one of my favorite questions. The command and control, top-down speak. Who listens to it? No one. Who believes it? No one. It is almost an utter waste of time. And when I listen, I always listen for it when when there's a crisis and some CEO speaking up. It's just like, oh, who wrote that? I can almost tell you in some communities who wrote that speech. It's that obvious, and it's that just awful. You've hit on the question of authenticity is a word, and qualitative is another really important word. What I do, two things. One is giving people permission inside an organization to tell their story based on their own perception and their own values and their own experiences. The best way to do that is to actually model that yourself. So if you are in a nonprofit and you are having an experience and there's something that's not going well, and you are anticipating, or you've been approached by somebody else in the organization who's saying, well, that didn't go very well. And then you say, we had this experience in 2005 and it looked like this. And I was really worried and I did this and it was good, or it was bad, or effective or not effective. And I learned a lot from that. And then when I told this story again, or when I approached this issue again, I did it differently. That allows people, by your own behavior that you've modeled, to be able to speak up and tell their stories. You can talk about creating open space, safe space, not muting, all you like, but until you actually manifest it yourself, people are going to be still a little hesitant, because often people get in trouble for speaking up if it sounds like it's not in accord with the organizational speech. So that's one idea. And I really think that's a very, very big thing for people my age. I think we have to walk our talk if we're going to actually enable others and create the conditions for them to be empowered. I hate that word, but that is the right word. The other thing you very aptly pointed to it is, how do others perceive what you're saying? So in this book, Teaching the Dinosaur to Dance, and actually on this website that I've got, I'd love you to buy the book, but if you don't want to, it's fine. A website called teachingthedinosaur.com. We've got the tools there. And one of the tools is called an enterprise onion. And it's saying to organizations, if you want to test how other people hear your story and whether it resonates, because resonance is the word here we're looking for, whether it's believable, then go out and test it. Go test it with not just the like-minded, which everybody does. And oh yes, they all loved it. Well, isn't that funny? They all think alike. Go out and test it with people who are open-minded. Go out and test it with people who might be critical of what you're doing or cynical about it or suspicious. And if you really need to, and you've really got it in your gut to do this, go out and test it with people who are opposed to what you're doing and see how it lands there. We've actually got a series of tools that allow you to do that. And some of these aren't, this isn't rocket science, but it's hard sometimes to convince anybody inside an organization, if they're afraid of letting making or control, to talk to somebody outside their organization. But that's where you really test things. I spent a lot of my career, and I think, Beth, it sounds like you did too, in that interface between companies and communities and advocates. And, I was constantly telling corporations and nonprofits, frankly, you may think that that's what people believe you're saying, but they don't. And until you get to a point where you're telling a story that's believable, you're just wasting money, you're wasting resources, you're wasting time. And now we've got a world where we've got citizen journalists, we've got people with, cell phones who can not only do talks on cell phones, but they can tell stories, and they are. So there are lots of storytellers out there telling your story. Talk to Amazon. I talk a lot about that in the book. The great irony is that I'm trying to, I have to sell my book on Amazon. So I'm hoping they don't read the book. But anyway, I think there's a lot in what you've just said, and it's going to take intention on our part and some risk taking to be able to move out of the place we're in, because right now people are feeling like they're muted.
Donna, thank you very much for that. I'm going to order your book. I just love this idea. And actually, as he was, what's just arisen from what you've just said about this particular organization is that it is very risk averse and extremely opaque. And although it's a members club with sort of near about 20,000 members, the members really are not told or hardly told anything. And it's anything but transparent. And I'm just really struck that transparency should be a prerequisite, because if people are telling phony stories, it will be obvious if there's transparency. So that, I think, is another thing that's needed. And transparency requires courage. So that's, again, very interesting.
Transparency is a big value for a lot of organizations. It's a core value, but it does mean a lot of different things. And it's not as tough as sustainability as a value. I don't think anything's more difficult than defining sustainability, but transparency is a really big theme. I sat on the board of Transparency International for quite a while in North America and in Africa. And boy, it's a loaded term too, but just talking about it, what does that mean? is profound. It can really open up your thinking. Great. Thank you for the question.
Donna, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I just realized, Donna, that because you had to shift your phone, you can't see the chat. So just that you know, Eleanor put the link. Shared the link already. After you mentioned it, it's in the chat.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, and then there is a very juicy announcement. But is there anything else, anyone else who wants to come in with a question or a reflection at this stage? You don't have to, but I just want to make sure everybody can. No? Okay.
Oh,
Then maybe. We have Rob. Hi, Rob. Come in.
Hello. I actually grew up in Edmonton, so I can resonate a lot with all your stories around the oil patch and all that. I live in BC now, so I figure I watch it from afar now and sort of cringe, you know, a lot. But it's, yeah, I'm just an ordinary guy. I don't have any affiliation with any organization or anything like that, but I'm a spectator, I guess, of world events and everything that goes on. And I resonate very much with what you said. I really appreciate what you've been saying. Yeah, I'm struggling with the thing about you know, what I can do as an individual on this level. I contribute a lot to organizations, NGOs, and so on around the world that I think are doing meaningful work. And you know, it's a good feeling to be able to do that. My challenge is getting beyond seeing how there's so many things that are so obvious that could be changed, but as you say, the rigidity that's in the human mind is it's hard. It's very difficult to deal with, and my own journey is more and more with trying to understand how to deal with conflict, both outside and inside, in a way that doesn't create more conflict.
yeah.
So that's, yeah. So the dialogue and compassion are appreciated that you bring those up, because for me, that and meditation and seeing how these conflicts are actually just an external display of what's going on in our own consciousness. So to be more aware of what this consciousness is very helpful for me, because I see how things polarize in my own mind, never mind what's going on out there. So I guess I don't really have a question. I'm just sort of, you know, just supporting. I have a deep appreciation for what you've said, and really for what everyone else has said too, because I think this is really important, these kinds of conversations, are tremendously important. Thank you.
If I could offer a response, and I'm grateful for that feedback. A big part of the reason I feel like I wrote this book is because I felt like I ran into a lot of brick walls. I should have a very flat nose. I can't stay muted when an issue emerges that I think is wrong, or somebody's suffering. I have it is impossible for me to stay muted. It's gotten me into an enormous amount of trouble in my life. I'm compassionate, but I can't, it's like I can't be that bystander. So my problem is, as a 61-year-old woman, is how do I help other people, younger people in particular, who have inherited all this from us? Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And some of them are pretty angry about it. I talk about the intergenerational questions and new leadership and rebuilders in this book. And I think there's a reason for the anger and the frustration, and I'm empathetic to it, and yet I feel responsible for it too. So a big part of the reason for writing this was to be able to say to younger generations, please do not run into that brick wall, going as fast as you possibly can, because you will get bruised and you may get angry and you may feel like never getting up and doing that again, but I need you to, because we need you to do that. We need you to do better than we did. And the only way that I can teach, I'm back to that word, is by sharing my stories of success and failure. And I share in this book, I mean, one of the things that I was given I was given awards for was a scholarship program in Yemen. 100 Yemeni students selected based on merit, high school students, grads, came to Canada and studied and flourished. And I'm telling you in this book that I see that as a failure. And I explain why, but I'll let you read the book to find out why. And people are puzzled by that, but I know that to be true in my own. I've analyzed it, I've thought about it. So I think it's our ability to speak our own truths to others and to give them the better guidance, me included, to give people better guidance about how to deal with really tough situations. And they're only human. We're all only human. And we're asking a lot. Maybe we're asking too much of a few. But how do we do this better? And so I think a big part of this book is about the intergenerational piece. And, lots of times I'll say to younger people, I'm the dinosaur. Like, I am the dinosaur for you. I'm sure I'm a dinosaur to my kids most days. So how do I help you? Because I have to, and you have to, because we know we've run into a lot of brick walls. How do we turn that into something that's useful? Anyway, there's a lot of that in this book, because there has to be. And so hopefully it helps answer those questions. I'm sure it does not do a complete job, but that's at the root of it. So I'm glad you asked this non-question, because I probably needed to share this. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to go to the last one of today before we go to announcements, but I saw Vic, I saw your question. Do you want to bring it in to the call?
Sure. Do we have time? That'd be great. I'll just read it out for you. I've actually been talking to a lot of tribe leaders recently, some in the Philippines, and have been in the Amazon. And they're all telling the same story about corporations coming in to basically mine their lands, and in that process, removing them from their own land. And additionally, are they not only removed from the sacred space that they've grown up for, ancient, they are given checks. They are given checks, this thing called money, that they never needed before to buy food. They had it all. When they got kicked out, they didn't have access to the food anymore, so they had to take the money, selling their land. So what I said is that in both places, tribe members have shifted their story from having a sense of stewardship for the land to ownership of property that they can and actually need to sell. So my question to you is, how can we think that business will ever change their mode of operation without changing the money system? Any thoughts?
Huge question, huge question. Actually, I have heard the same, not in exactly the same terms, but I have heard from a lot of elders, and I spend a lot of time with Indigenous people because I'm really grateful for them, because I think they have a lot to teach us. I have talked to a lot of elders, even here in North America and Canada, who are saying that the new God for their people is money, and they are upset by it, just as you've described. I also, and I'll give, in the very last chapter of the book, I talk about a green energy project that happened here in Alberta, in the southern part of the province, where over 17,000 acres of land were leased for long term by a German company to be able to put up wind turbines. And I was an observer in this electricity hearing. And there are directly impacted Indigenous communities, the Blackfeet tribe here in southern Alberta, who are affected by that wind farm for many reasons, one including a very significant Indigenous spiritual site called the Majorville Medicine Wheel, which is older than Stonehenge, is located within sight and within sound of where this wind turbine farm is going up. 87 wind turbines, enormous ones. And I was really upset by this because I know the relevance of this site archaeologically, and I also understand its relevance to First Nations. So 3 of the tribes were going to participate in this hearing, and there were archaeologists who participated, and the tribes were going to participate and talk about what the impacts to the spiritual site. It's a site where people go to do vision quests. It's a very, very significant spiritual site in southern Alberta, well, in North America, actually. And the day before the hearing, this happened in the fall, last fall, the day before the hearing where the First Nations were supposed to present their arguments, they withdrew their arguments, all 3 of the bands. And I was just shocked. I was really upset, actually, because I couldn't understand why they wouldn't want to speak up. And they got contracts from the bidder, the successful bidder on this project, this German company, multinational. And they got to decide, the band council got to decide in all 3 cases. And the elders were really upset because they know what that means. To have wind turbines and that sound within sight and blinking lights, like thousands of blinking lights, and sound within sight of a spiritual site, it means that place will be altered. So, I mean, it wasn't my decision to make. Was it a good public policy decision? I don't think so. And I was very loud and noisy about it. But ultimately, it's for the First Nations to decide. And within their communities, there was discord. I'm still really upset about it. I mean, to the point where I wrote about it in this book, and I've written about it otherwise. I don't know the answers to those questions, but I feel like they're profound questions, and we're witnesses to this. And I don't want to be a bystander. I want to be a witness. And I think that is a different role. And I think back to transparency, I think transparency of decision making. And I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that this decision was transparent. Media didn't want to cover it because it was just, a wind farm. Who cares? And that's kind of where we've gotten to. So I'm not happy about that. I'm really upset still about it, and I'm not going to let go of it. But I don't know exactly what my role is. And I'm hoping that through more dialogue, that it will become clearer if there is a role, or who's got what role, or how to support that dialogue. But it's really a big question. So I'm glad you raise it. I don't have the answers, but I am asking the same questions.
Thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you, Vic. I think that was a nice one to end with, because it's just unanswered, but all of us will carry this question with us. It's a big one. Thank you, Donna, for your time, for your book. Let's start with thank you for your book, and then may it become a gift to the world and find many people, and help us one step at a time, each of us, make that contribution to a better future. Is there any last words of wisdom you would like to share before I hand over to Eleanor?
Oh, I think dancing is fun. I mean, there's so much going on. There's so many asteroids coming our way. that you have to look for the places that are positive and energizing. And I think, well, it's not easy. It is possible. So please keep trying. And thank you so much for being here today. That in itself is heartening.
Thank you, Donna. Eleanor, what is bringing us? I'm going to turn the computer on.
Are you turning? No, it's okay actually, because I've got it all here in front of me, so I'm sure you can hear me.
Okay.
No, it's just we are very excited to announce our next series, which will be over the month of May, and it's a series on love, and it's love in the time of crisis. So it will be over 8 sessions, and we will be approaching love from many perspectives of how to go about restoring the power of love. And we will have many guests, including Satish Kumar, Mark Vernon, John Briggs, Jane Clark, and many more. So we do hope that you will join us in May. And that is all for me. Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Donna, for today. This has been a wonderful session, so thank you both.
Well, it's so nice, right, to sit here in the same room, which you might not have known until now. But thank you all for being here. Hope to see you next time. I am like very excited about this love series, but there's other things that might catch your attention and intention the coming months. So may our paths cross again. Have a good evening, good day, wherever you are, and see you next time. And thank you again, Donna.